Stanley's Christmas Adventure. Stanley's Christmas Adventure by Jeff Brown. Pictures by Scott Nash. Published by Harper Trophy. Copyright 1993. Contents. Prologue, page 1. Chapter 1. Sara, page 7. Chapter 2. The Sleigh, page 21. Chapter 3. Snow City, page 27. Chapter 4. Sara's Father, page 35. Chapter 5. The Letters, page 45. Chapter 6. Going Home, page 59. Chapter 7. Christmas, page 65. Prologue. She was the sort of little girl who liked to be sure of things, so she went all over Snow City, checking up. The elves had done their work. At the post office, male elves had read the letters, making lists of who wanted what. In the great workshops, the doll room, the toy plant, the game mill, gift elves had filled the orders, taking care as to color and size and style. In the wrap shed, the gifts lay ready, wrapped now in gay paper with holly and pine cones, sorted by country, by city or village, by road or lane or street. The wrap elves teased her. "Don't trust us, eh?" "Snooping, we call this, miss." "Pooh!" said the little girl. "Well done, elves. Good work." But at home in Snow City Square, all was not well. "Don't slam the door, dear," said her mother, weeping. "Your father's having his nap." "Mother, what's wrong?" "He won't go this year, he says." The mother sobbed. "He's been so cross lately, but I never—" "Why? Why won't he go?" "They've lost faith. Don't care any more, he says." "Surely not everyone," I said. "Think of your favorite letter, the one by your desk." "He just growled at me." "Pooh!" said the girl. "It's not fair, really. I mean, everything's ready. Why—" "Not now, dear," said the mother. "It's been a dreadful day." In the little office at the back of the house, the girl studied the letter her mother had mentioned, framed with others on a wall. "I am a regular boy, except that I got flat," the letter said, "from an accident. I was going to ask for new clothes, but my mother already bought them. She had to, because of the flatness. So I'm just writing to say, don't bother about me. Have a nice holiday. My father says be careful driving. There are lots of bad drivers this time of year." The girl thought for a moment, and an idea came to her. "Hmm. Well, why not?" she said. She looked again at the letter. The name Lamb Chop was printed across the top, and an address. It was signed Stanley, USA. Chapter 1. Sara. It was 2 nights before Christmas, and all through the house not a lamb chop was stirring. But something was. Stanley Lambchop sat up in his bed. "Listen! Someone said rat." "It was more like grat," said his younger brother Arthur from his bed. "In the living room, I think." The brothers tiptoed down the stairs. For a moment all was silence in the darkened living room. Then came a thump. "Ouch!" said a small voice. "Drat again!" "Are you a burglar?" Arthur called. "Did you hurt yourself?" "I am not a burglar," said the voice. "Where's the ah?" The lights came on. The brothers stared. Before the fireplace, by the Christmas tree, stood a slender, dark-haired little girl wearing a red jacket and skirt, both trimmed with white fur. "I banged it twice," she said, rubbing her knee. "Coming down the chimney and just now." "We do have a front door, you know," said Stanley. "Well, so does my house. But, you know, this time of year—" The girl sounded a bit nervous. "Actually, I've never done this before. Let's see. Ha, ha, ha! Season's greetings! Ha, ha, ha!" "Ha, ha, to you," said Arthur. "What's so funny?" "Funny?" said the girl. "Oh, ho, ho, ho! I meant, I'm Sara Christmas. Who are you?" "Arthur Lambchop," said Arthur. "That's my brother Stanley." "It is? But he's not flat." "He was, but I blew him up," Arthur explained, "with a bicycle pump." "Oh, no! I wish you hadn't." Sara Christmas sank into a chair. "Drat! It's all going wrong. Perhaps I shouldn't have come. But that's how I am. Headstrong, my mother says. Excuse me," Stanley said, "but where are you from?" "And why did you come?" said Arthur. Sara told them. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were reading in bed. A tap came at the door, and then Stanley's voice. "Hey, can I come in?" Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop cared gratefully for proper speech. "Hay is for horses, Stanley," she said, "and not can, dear. You may come in." Stanley came in. "What is the explanation, my boy, of this late call?" said Mr. Lambchop, remembering past surprises. "You have not I see, become flat again. Has a genie come to visit? Or perhaps the President of the United States has called. Mrs. Lambchop smiled. You are very amusing, George. Arthur and I were in bed, said Stanley, but we heard a noise and went to see. It was a girl called Sara Christmas from Snow City. She talks a lot. She says her father says he won't come this year. But Sara thinks he might change his mind if I ask him to, because I wrote him a letter once that he liked. She wants me to go with her to Snow City in her father's sleigh. It's at the North Pole, I think. Stanley caught his breath. I said I'd have to ask you first. Quite right, said Mrs. Lambchop. Mr. Lambchop went to the bathroom and drank a glass of water to calm himself. Now then, Stanley, he said, returning, you have greatly startled us. Surely. Put on your robe, George, said Mrs. Lambchop. Let us hear for ourselves what this visitor has to say. This is delicious. Sara Christmas sipped the hot chocolate Mrs. Lambchop had served them all. My mother makes it too, with cinnamon in it, and little cookies with... Her glance had fallen on the mantelpiece. What's that, pinned up there? Christmas stockings, Stanley said. The blue one's mine. But the other, the great square thing. It's a pillowcase, Arthur blushed. My stocking wouldn't do. I have very small feet. Pooh! Sara laughed. You wanted extra gifts, so... Sara dear, Mrs. Lambchop said, your father? Has he truly made up his mind, you think? Oh, yes, Sara sighed. But I thought, Stanley being flat, that really interested him. I mean, I couldn't be sure. But if nobody ever did anything without... You seem a very nice girl, Sara. Mr. Lambchop gave a little laugh. But you have been joking with us, surely. The phone rang, and he answered it. Hello, George, the caller said. This is your neighbor, Frank Smith. I know it's late, but I must congratulate you on your... Christmas lawn display. Best lawn, said Mr. Lambchop. Display? The sleigh and those lifelike reindeer. What makes them move about like that? Batteries, I suppose? Just a moment, Frank. Mr. Lambchop went to the window and looked out. Mrs. Lambchop beside him. My goodness, she said. 1, 2, 3, 4, 8. And such a pretty sleigh. Mr. Lambchop returned to the phone. They are lifelike, aren't they? Goodbye. Thank you for calling, Frank. See, I'm not a joking kind of person, actually, said Sara Christmas. Now, my idea might work, even without the flatness. Do let Stanley go. To the North Pole? Said Mrs. Lambchop. At night? By himself? Good gracious, Sara! It's not fair asking Stanley, but not me, said Arthur, feeling hurt. It's always like this. I never. Oh, pooh! Sara Christmas smiled. Actually, you could all go. It's a very big sleigh. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop looked at each other, then at Stanley and Arthur, then at each other again. Stanley just might make a difference, George, Mrs. Lambchop said. And if we can all go? Quite right, said Mr. Lambchop. Sara, we will accompany you to Snow City. Hooray! Shouted Stanley and Arthur, and Sara too. Mrs. Lambchop thought they should wait until Frank Smith had gone to bed. Imagine the gossip, she said, were he to see our reindeer fly away. Mr. Lambchop called his office to leave a message on the nighttime answering machine. He would not be in tomorrow, he said, as he had been called unexpectedly out of town. There! Cried Stanley by the window. The Smith's light is out. The Lambchops changed quickly from pajamas to warmer clothing and followed Sara to the sleigh. Chapter 2. The Sleigh. Welcome aboard, said Sara from the driver's seat. The Lambchops, sitting on little benches that made the big sleigh resemble a roofless bus, could scarcely contain their excitement. The night sky shone bright with stars, and from the windows of nearby houses red and green Christmas lights twinkled over snowy lawns and streets. Before them the 8 reindeer, fur shiny in the moonlight, tossed their antlered heads. Ready when you are, Sara, Mr. Lambchop said. Good! Sara cleared her throat. Fasten your seat belts, please. We are about to depart for Snow City. My name is Sara. I guess you know that. And I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have. Please do not move about without permission of the sleigh master. That's me, at least right now, and obey whatever instructions may. Please, said Arthur. Oh, all right. The Lambchops fastened their seat belts, and Sara took up the reins. Ready 1, ready 2, 3. Just numbers? Cried Mrs. Lambchop. Why, we know such lovely reindeer names. Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen. Comet, Cupid, Donder, Blitzen, shouted Arthur. They're from a poem we know. Those are good names, said Sara. Ready 1 through 8? The reindeer pawed the ground, jingling their harness bells. Now, said Sara. The jingling stopped suddenly, and a great silence fell. Now a silver mist rose, swirling about the sleigh. The startled Lambchops could see nothing beyond the mist, not their house, nor the houses of their neighbors, not the twinkling Christmas lights, not the bright stars above. There was only the silver mist everywhere, cool against their cheeks. "What is this, Sara?" Mrs. Lambchop called. "Are we not to proceed to Snow City?" Sara's voice came cheerfully through the mist. "We have proceeded. We're there." Chapter 3. Snow City. Beyond the mist, excited voices rose. "Sara's back! With strangers! Big ones! Where's she been?" "Papa's elves," said Sara's voice. As she spoke, the mist swirled, then vanished as suddenly as it had come. Above them, the stars shone bright again. The sleigh rested now in a snow-covered square in front of a pretty red-roofed house. All about the square were tiny cottages, their windows aglow with light. Elves surrounded the sleigh. "Who are these people? Is it true, what we've heard? Ask Sara, she'll know." The Lambchop smiled and waved. The elves seemed much like ordinary men and women, except that they had pointy ears, very wrinkled faces, and were only about half as tall as Arthur. All wore leather breeches or skirts with wide pockets from which tools and needles stuck out. "Miss Sara!" came a voice. "Is it true? He won't go this year?" Sara hesitated. "Well, sort of, but perhaps the Lambchop's here. Be patient. Go home, please." The elves straggled off toward their cottages, grumbling. "Not going? Ha! After all our work? The who chops? I'd go work somewhere else, but where?" A plump lady in an apron bustled out of the red-roofed house. "Sara, are you all right? Going off like that? Though we did find your note. Gracious! Are those all lamb chops, dear?" "I'm fine, Mama," said Sara. "They wouldn't let Stanley come by himself. That's Stanley there. The other one's Arthur." Stanley was flat, but he got round again. "Clever!" said Mrs. Christmas. "Well, do all come in. Are you fond of hot chocolate?" "An excellent plan. I do see that, but oh, he's in such a state! And with Stanley no longer flat." Mrs. Christmas sighed. "More chocolate, lamb chops? I add a dash of cinnamon. Tasty, yes?" "Delicious," said Mrs. Lambchop. Everyone sat silent, sipping. Mr. Lambchop felt the time had come. "May we see him now, Mrs. Christmas? We should be getting home. So much to do this time of year." "You forget where you are, George," said Mrs. Lambchop. "Mrs. Christmas surely is aware of the demands of the season." "I'm sorry about not being flat," Stanley said. "I did get tired of it, though." "No need to apologize," said Mrs. Christmas. Flat, round, whatever. People must be what shape they wish. So true, said Mrs. Lambchop. But will your husband agree? We shall see. Come. Mrs. Christmas rose, and the Lambchops followed her down the hall. Mrs. Christmas knocked on a door. Visitors, dear, from America. Send 'em back, said a deep voice. Sir, Mr. Lambchop tried to sound cheerful. A few minutes, perhaps. 'Tis the season to be jolly, eh? Bah! said the voice. Go home! What a terrible temper, Stanley said. He doesn't want to meet us at all. I already have met him once, Arthur whispered, in a department store. That wasn't the real one, dear, Mrs. Lambchop said. Too bad, said Arthur. He was much nicer than this one. Sara stepped forward. Papa, can you hear me, Papa? I hear you all right, said the deep voice. Took the great sleigh without permission, didn't you? Rascal! The letter on your wall, Papa? Sara said. The Lambchop letter? Well, they're here, the whole family. It wasn't easy, Papa. I went down their chimney and scraped my knee, and then I banged it, the same knee, when I— Sara! said the voice. Sara hushed, and so did everyone else. The flat boy, eh? said the voice. Mrs. Lambchop took a comb from her bag and tidied Arthur's hair. Mr. Lambchop straightened Stanley's collar. Come in, said the voice behind the door. Chapter 4. Sara's Father. The room was very dark, but it was possible to make out a desk at the far side, and someone seated behind it. The Lambchops held their breaths. This was perhaps the most famous person in the world. Guess what, Papa? said Sara, sound ing quite nervous. The Lambchops know names for our reindeer. No answer came. Names, Papa, not just numbers. There's Dashes and Francis and Dasher, said Stanley. Then Dancer, then Francis, cried Sara. Or is it Prances? Then waste of time, this, said the figure behind the desk. But then a switch clicked, and lights came on. The Lambchops stared. Except for a large TV in one corner and a speaker box on the desk, the room was much like Mr. Lambchop's study at home. There were bookshelves and comfortable chairs. Framed letters, one of them Stanley's, hung behind the desk, along with photographs of Mrs. Christmas, Sara, and elves and reindeer, singly and in groups. Sara's father was large and stout, but otherwise not what they had expected. He wore a blue zip jacket with N Pole Athletic Club lettered across it, and sat with his feet in fuzzy brown slippers up on the desk. His long white hair and beard were in need of trimming, and the beard had crumbs in it. On the desk, along with his feet, were a plate of cookies, a bowl of potato chips, and a bottle of strawberry soda with a straw in it. "George Lambchop, sir," said Mr. Lambchop. "Good evening. May I present my—" "wife, Harriet, and our sons, Stanley and Arthur." "How do you do?" Sara's father sipped his soda. "Whichever is Stanley, step forward, please, and turn about." Stanley stepped forward and turned about. "You're round, boy!" "I blew him up," said Arthur, "with a bicycle pump." Sara's father raised his eyebrows. Very funny indeed." He ate some potato chips. "Well, what brings you all here?" Mr. Lambchop cleared his throat. "I understand, Mr. No, that can't be right. What is the proper form of address?" "Depends where you're from. Santa is the American way, but I'm known also as Father Christmas, Père Noël, Babbo Natale, Julenis. Little country way off somewhere, they call me the Great Hugga-Wuggo." "Hugga-Wuggo!" Arthur laughed loudly, and Mrs. Lambchop shook her head at him. Mr. Lambchop continued, "We understand, sir, Santa, if I may, that you propose not to make your rounds this year. We are here to ask that you reconsider." "Reconsider!" said Sara's father. "The way things are these days? Ha! See for yourselves." The big TV in the corner clicked on, and he switched from channel to channel. The first channel showed battleships firing flaming missiles. The second, airplanes. Dropping bombs. The third, cars crashing other cars. Then came buildings burning, people begging for food, people hitting each other, people firing pistols at policemen. The last channel showed a game show, men and women in chicken costumes grabbing for prizes in a pool of mud. Sara's father switched off the TV. "Peace on earth? Goodwill toward men? Been wasting my time, it seems." "You have been watching far too much television," said Mrs. Lambchop. "No wonder you take a dim view of things." "Facts are facts, madam. Everywhere violence and greed. Ha! Right here in my own office, a whole family come begging for Christmas treats." The Lambchops were deeply shocked. "I'm greedy sometimes," said Stanley, "but not always." "I'm quite nice, actually," Arthur said, "and Stanley's even nicer than me." "Ay, dear," said Mrs. Lambchop, "nicer than I." Mr. Lambchop, finding it hard to believe that he was at the North Pole having a conversation like this, chose his words with care. "You misjudge us, sir," he said. "There is indeed much violence in the world, and selfishness, but not everyone. We Lambchops, for example—" "Ha! Different, are you?" Sara's father spoke into the little box on his desk. "Yo, Elf Ewald!" Central Files, said a voice from the box. Ewald here. Ewald, said Sara's father, check this year's letters under USA. Bring me the lamb chop file. Chapter 5. The Letters. Elf Ewald had come and gone, leaving behind a large brown folder. Not greedy lamb chops? We shall see. Sara's father drew a letter from the folder and read it aloud. Dear Santa, my parents say I can't have a real car until I'm grown up. I want one now, a big red one. Make that 2 cars, both red. Ha! Hear that? Shameful! Mrs. Lambchop shook her head. I should be interested, she said, to learn who wrote that letter. It is signed, Frederick Lampop. Stanley laughed. Our name's not Lampop, and we don't even know any Fredericks. Mistakes do happen, you know. I get millions of letters. Sara's father drew from the folder again. Ah, this one's from you. Dear Santa, he read, I hope you are fine. I need lots of gifts this year. Shoes and socks and shirts and pants and underwear and big tents. At least 100 of each would be nice. 100? There's greediness. It does seem a bit much, Stanley, said Mr. Lambchop. And why tents, for goodness sake? You'll see, said Stanley. Sara's father read on. Of each would be nice, but not delivered to my house. It was on TV about a terrible earthquake in South America where all the houses fell down, and people lost all their clothes and don't have anywhere to live. Please take everything to where the earthquake was. Thank you. Your friend, Stanley Lambchop. P.S. I would send my old clothes, but they are mostly from when I was splat and wouldn't fit anybody else. Good for you, Stanley, said Mrs. Lambchop. A fine idea, the tents. Huh, 1 letter, that's all. Sara's father chose another letter. This one's got jam on it. Excuse me, said Arthur. I was eating a sandwich. Dear Santa, Sara's father read, I have hung up a pillowcase instead of a stocking. Ha! The old pillowcase trick. Wait, cried Arthur. Read the rest. Instead of a stocking. Please fill this up with chocolate bars, my favorite kind with nuts. My brother Stanley is writing to you about an earthquake and how people there need clothes and tents and things. Well, I think they need food too, and little stoves to cook on. So please give them the chocolate bars, and food and stoves. The bars should be the big kind. It doesn't matter about the nuts. Sincerely, Arthur Lambchop. Mrs. Lambchop gave Arthur a little hug. All right, 2 letters, said Sara's father. But from brothers. Count as 1, really. He took a last letter from the folder. Nice penmanship, this one, Mr. and Mrs. George Lambchop. Now there's a surprise." "Well, why not?" said Mrs. Lambchop. Mr. Lambchop said, "No harm, eh? Just dropping a line." Their letter was read. "Dear Sir, perhaps you expect letters from children only, since as people grow older they often begin to doubt that you truly exist. But when our two sons were very small and asked if you were real, we said yes. And if they were to ask again now, we would not say no. We would say that you are not real, of course, for those who do not believe in you, but very real indeed for those who do. Our Christmas wish is that you will never have cause to doubt that Stanley and Arthur Lambchop and their parents take the latter position. Sincerely, Mr. and Mrs. George Lambchop, USA." Sara's father thought for a moment. Latter position? Ah, do believe. I see." "See, Papa," said Sara, "no greediness, not one." "Fine letters, Sara. I agree." There was sadness in the deep voice now. "But all, Sara, from the same family that thought to deceive me with that flatness story. Flat indeed!" Mrs. Lambchop gasped. "Deceive? Oh, no!" "Round is round, madam." Sara's father shook his head. "The lad's shape speaks for itself." The hearts of all the Lambchops sank within them. Their mission had failed, they thought. For millions and millions of children all over the world, a joyful holiday was lost, perhaps never to come again. Arthur felt especially bad. It was his fault, he told himself, for thinking of that bicycle pump. Stanley felt worst of all. If only he hadn't grown tired of being flat. Hadn't let Arthur blow him round again. If only there were proof. And then he remembered something. "Wait!" he shouted, and stood on tiptoe to whisper in Mrs. Lambchop's ear. "What?" she said. "I can't. The what?" "Oh, yes! I had forgotten. Good for you, Stanley." Rummaging in her bag, she found her wallet, from which she drew a photograph. She gave it to Sara's father. "Do keep that," she said. "We have more at home." The snapshot had been taken by Mr. Lambchop the day after the big bulletin board fell on Stanley. It showed him, quite flat, sliding under a closed door. Only his top half was visible, smiling up at the camera. The bottom half was still behind the door. For a long moment, as Sara's father studied the picture, no one spoke. "My apologies, Lambchops," he said at last. "Flat he is. Was, anyhow. I've half a mind to—" he sighed. "But those red cars, asking for two, that—" "That was Lamb Pop!" cried Arthur. "Not—" "Just teasing, lad." Sara's father had jumped up, a great smile on his face. Yo, elves! He shouted into his speakerphone. Prepare to load gifts. Look lively. Tomorrow is Christmas Eve, you know. The next moments were joyful indeed. Thank you, thank you! Hooray! 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 Shouted Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop, and Stanley and Arthur and Sara. Sara's mother kissed everyone. Mrs. Lambchop kissed Sara's father, and almost fainted when she realized what she had done. Then Sara's father asked Stanley to autograph the sliding under the door picture, and when Stanley had written all best wishes S. Lambchop across the picture, he pinned it to the wall. Blew him round, eh? He said to Arthur. Like to have seen that. He turned to Sara. Come, my dear. While I freshen up, teach me those reindeer names. Then I will see our visitors safely home. Chapter 6. Going Home. A crowd of elves had gathered with Mrs. Christmas and Sara to say good-bye. Bless you, Lambchops! They called. Thank goodness you came. Think if you hadn't. Whew! Farewell, farewell! In the great sleigh, Sara's father took up the reins. Ready, Lambchops? He made a fine appearance now, his hair and beard combed, and wearing a smart green cloak and cap. The famous red suit, he had explained, was reserved for delivering gifts. Goodbye, everyone, called Mrs. Lambchop. We will remember you always. You bet, cried Stanley. I'll never forget. But you will, dear, said Mrs. Christmas. You will all forget. Hardly, Mr. Lambchop smiled. An evening like this does not slip one's mind. Papa will see to it, actually, said Sara. Snow City, all of us here. We're supposed to be, you know, sort of a mystery. Isn't that silly? I mean, if... Sara, her father said, we must go. The Lambchops looked up at the night sky, still bright with stars, then turned for a last sight of the little red-roofed house behind them, and of the elves' cottages about the snowy square. We are ready, said Mr. Lambchop. Goodbye, goodbye, called Mrs. Lambchop, and Stanley and Arthur. Goodbye, goodbye, called the elves, waving. The 8 reindeer tossed their heads, jingling their harness bells. One bell flew off, and Stanley caught the little silver cup in his hand. Suddenly, as before, the jingling stopped. All was silence, and the pale mist rose again about the sleigh. Sara's father's voice rang clear. Come, Dasher, Dancer, Prancer, Vixen. Come, Comet, Cupid, Donder, and, oh, what's his name? Blitzen, Stanley called. Thank you, come Blitzen. The mist swirled, closing upon the sleigh. Chapter 7. Christmas. The lamb chops all remarked the next morning on how soundly they had slept, and how late. Mr. Lamb Chop ate breakfast in a rush. "Will you be all day at the office, George?" Mrs. Lamb Chop asked. "It is Christmas Eve, you know." "There is much to do," said Mr. Lamb Chop. "I will be kept late, I'm afraid." But there was little to occupy him at his office, since a practical joker had left word he would not be in. He was home by noon to join friends and family for carol singing about the neighborhood. Mrs. Lamb Chop had the carolers in for hot chocolate, which was greatly admired. She had added cinnamon, she explained. The idea had just popped into her head. The carolers were all very jolly, and Frank Smith, who lived next door, made everyone laugh. The Lamb Chops hardest of all, by claiming he had seen reindeer on their lawn the night before. On Christmas morning they opened their gifts to each other, and gifts from relatives and friends. Then came a surprise for Stanley and Arthur. Mr. Lamb Chop had just turned. On the TV news. "And now a flash from South America, from where the earthquake was," the announcer was saying. "Homeless villagers here are giving thanks this morning for a tremendous supply of socks, shirts, underwear, and food. They have also received 1,000 tents and 1,000 little stoves to cook on." The screen showed a homeless villager looking grateful. "The tents and the little stoves," the villager said. "Just what we need. Bless whoever sends these tents and stoves. Also the many tasty chocolate bars with nuts." "He's blessing me!" cried Stanley. "I asked for tents in my letter, but I wasn't sure it would work." "Well, I wrote about stoves," Arthur said, "and chocolate bars, but they didn't have to have nuts." "Happy coincidences," thought Mr. and Mrs. Lamb Chop, smiling at each other. Christmas dinner, shared with various aunts, uncles, and cousins, was an enormous meal of turkey, yams, and 3 kinds of pie. Then everyone went ice skating in the park. By bedtime, Stanley and Arthur were more than ready for sleep. "A fine holiday," said Mr. Lamb Chop, tucking Arthur in. "Yes, indeed." Mrs. Lamb Chop tucked in Stanley. "Pleasant dreams, boys, and what's this?" She had found something on the table by his bed. "Why, it's a little bell, a silver bell." "It was in my pocket," Stanley said. "I don't know what it's from." "Pretty." "Good night, you two," said Mrs. Lamb Chop, and switched off the light. The brothers lay silent for a moment in the dark. "Stanley," Arthur said, "it was a nice holiday, don't you think?" "Extra nice," said Stanley. "But why?" "It's as if I have something wonderful to remember, but can't think what." "Me too." "Merry Christmas, Stanley." "Merry Christmas, Arthur," said Stanley, and soon they were both asleep.